This podcast is brought to you by United Way of Cast Clay. United Way of Cast Clay strives to create a vibrant, welcoming community where everyone can thrive. Get involved at unitedwaycastclay.org.
You're listening to The Vault, a forum communications podcast covering true crime and general intrigue in the upper Midwest. I'm Trisha Taurinskas. This is part 3 on a series of the kidnapping of Haskell Bohn. If you haven't listened to the first 2 parts, go ahead and do that now. It will all make a lot more sense. After 6 days of being blindfolded in a basement with hardly any sunlight, Haskell was told that his release had finally been successfully negotiated. Freedom was near. And just as Haskell was taken downstairs 6 days prior, his team of captors led him upstairs to the garage, where he was once again loaded into the back seat of the vehicle. His captors drove for nearly an hour down bumpy, winding roads, rendering him unable to identify to authorities where he had been. And as the vehicle came to a stop, the kidnappers gave him very specific instructions. According to the police transcript, the one we've mentioned before, Haskell told law enforcement that the kidnappers, whose identities he didn't know at the time, told him to lie down for 10 minutes after they drove away. They told him to then walk to the right for a half hour. And they advised him not to call the police at all, and to only call his father. But right before they gave him the instructions, his captor, the one he had sort of bonded with, handed him $10. It was a fulfillment of the promise he made to pay Haskell back for the $7 that had been taken from his billfold on the day of the kidnapping. When Haskell's captors finally drove away into the dark night, he followed orders, for the most part. Instead of 10 minutes, he waited just about 5 before getting up and trekking through the fields, which led him to a nearby farmhouse. Haskell told law enforcement that he had made his way across a cornfield and a road before noticing a for sale sign outside of a home that clearly had its lights on. He recalled dogs barking as he walked toward the front door. Then a woman yelled from inside the home, likely terrified to see a man stumbling up to her house in the middle of the night. To calm her, Haskell yelled out, "I'm Haskell Bohn, that was kidnapped." A man came to the door and requested Haskell show his identification, which he did. The family then welcomed him into the home, where he was able to call police. He was reunited with his family, and the hunt for his captors began. Unbeknownst to law enforcement, those captors were headed to Colorado to continue their kidnapping spree. But they wouldn't escape the law for long. More than 2 years after Haskell's kidnapping, 2 men named Vern Sankey and Gordon Elkhorn were arrested in Chicago on charges related to the 1933 kidnapping of Charles Becher, a wealthy Colorado businessman. In a very similar fashion to the Bohn kidnapping, Becher was approached at gunpoint. He was blindfolded with tape and thrown in the back of the vehicle. His wife was present at the time of the abduction and was given a ransom note demanding $60,000. That's about $1.37 million in today's currency. Becher's wife's ability to identify the 2 men was critical to their capture and helpful to the Bohn case. Haskell identified Sankey and Elkhorn as the 2 men who abducted him from his home in the summer of 1932. That's according to a 1933 Minneapolis Star-Tribune article. As Haskell stated in the police transcript, he interacted with 2 main captors. However, he had told law enforcement the ringleader did allude to the fact that a gang of people were involved in the crime. At one point, when discussing what to do with Haskell, the ringleader claimed he'd discussed their plans with the rest of the gang. As it turns out, Sankey did run with a few Canadians that he had recruited from his time on the railroad. In addition to Alcorn, Sankey asked Ray Robinson to help him out. There are competing theories on Alcorn's involvement in Haskell's kidnapping. While Haskell did partially identify him as one of the captors, another member of Sankey's gang later confessed that he played a critical role in Haskell's abduction. Ray Robinson was arrested in Canada and extradited to Minnesota in 1933. He confessed to playing a key role in Haskell's kidnapping, according to a 1933 New York Times article. In addition to his confession, he told authorities that Sankey was the criminal mind behind the operation. He also told law enforcement that Sankey's wife, Fern Sankey, was an accomplice, having cooked meals for Haskell while he was held in her basement. While Fern Sankey was arrested and tried for Haskell's kidnapping, she was ultimately found not guilty by a jury who viewed her as a victim of her husband's crime. Ray Robinson received a 25-year sentence. He served it at Minnesota's Stillwater Penitentiary. It was a far cry from the life sentence other kidnappers, including Sankey, were facing under the newly minted Lindbergh Law. The Lindbergh Law played a critical role in this story, and here's why. In the aftermath of the infamous 1933 kidnapping of the 20-month-old child of famous aviator Charles Lindbergh, Congress passed legislation to crack down on the rising number of kidnappings being carried out by gangs throughout the country. The move made crossing state borders with a victim a federal offense, with a punishment of life in prison. The Lindbergh Law included a provision that stated a captive held for 7 days or more would automatically be assumed to have crossed state lines, opening up the door for federal prosecution and life in prison. At the time of Ray Robinson's confession, Sankey and Alcorn were being held for the kidnapping of Betcher. Because Betcher was held captive on Sankey's farm in Buffalo County, South Dakota, Sankey was transported to Sioux Falls, where he was to stand trial for the kidnapping of Betcher. It's also alleged that he was going to plead guilty to the kidnapping of Haskell Bohn. Yet, on his first night at South Dakota State Penitentiary in Sioux Falls, Sankey's body was found unresponsive. He had hung himself in his cell. The next day, Alcorn was sentenced in Sioux Falls to life in prison for the Betcher kidnapping, a term he carried out in Colorado's Leavenworth Penitentiary. As for Haskell Bohn, he went on to live an otherwise normal life. While his family's business didn't outlast the Great Depression, he carried out a career in the power sector, retiring from Illinois Power Company as its district manager. He was married, had children, and settled in a rural Illinois area. While his life took an otherwise normal turn, his children grew up hearing stories from a very different era of his life, one that included his time in captivity at the hands of the FBI's most wanted criminal. Unlock more cold cases and crimes from the past at inforum.news/try. Get your first 3 months of unlimited access to our entire news network for only 99 cents a month. Visit inforum.news/try to take advantage of this deal.